everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming out in the rain if you have to walk through the rain. I'm one of the organizers of this group that helped, is this too loud? It's okay. One of the organizers of this group who helped organize this event. Music. Oh, that was my song. Is this working still? Is it still working? Or?
No, I just don't.
I brought it back.
All right, there we go. I think that's good. Excellent. Good luck. Okay, so this is, I'm one of the organizers. What our group is interested in is exposing the Western intelligence agencies, the links between the Western intelligence agencies and the terrorism, which has everybody so concerned. I would say these days, but it's been going on for a long time. The reason why we're interested in exposing these links is because we believe that the war on terror has been a hoax on the American people, and it's led government to start and continue endless wars, which really have no purpose other than killing innocent people and redistributing wealth away from the middle class and up to the rich. People are hurt and injured, and there's really no reason that we should be having these wars, constant wars overseas. There's drones bombed on children. There's torture policies. All this has been a result of the war on terror and 9/11. So our point is to, once we expose these ties, hopefully people will decide that, that will be the moment in which we can have momentum to end a lot of these policies which really need to be ended. Our group is a local grassroots DC group, so we have meetings and anybody can join. Anybody can come to our meetings and check our website and attend our events. We have flyers, and we try to put on events like this as much as we can. Our flyers are free for anybody who wants to take them. And for these events, sometimes they cost us money, so we may put a box out, maybe on your way out. If you feel like giving donations, this event, of course, is free. And also feel free to order food. But if you feel like donating money, it would help pay for the events that we do. One of the activities that we're doing these days is, or at least the whole Truth movement, is trying to get the 28 pages declassified. It's what we call the 28 pages. After 9/11, Congress did an investigation. What happened on 9/11? 28 pages of the investigation has been classified and not open to the public. Those 28 pages reveal the Saudi Arabia connection to the hijackers. And therefore, revealing the Saudi Arabia connection, it reveals the connection of Western intelligence agencies, of the West, possibly the Bush administration. Which leads us to our guest speaker today, Michael Springmann. He worked in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, under the State Department at the end of the Cold War from 87 to 89. And he also noticed that there were connections between Western intelligence agencies and what was becoming, I guess, the transition from the Cold War to the early parts, I guess, of the war on terror, but noticed that there were connections, and he's going to talk about that today. So please give a hand for Mr. Springmann.
Hello, I'm Mike Springmann. I wanted to thank you all for coming, despite the strange weather. How many of you people out there know who I really am, other than the brief introduction? CIA. Okay, one fellow, and then, okay. I used to work for the State Department, and my job at the State Department was suddenly taken away from me. And I tried for the longest time to find out why. And began carefully observing what was going on, and decided that, after talking to Joe Trinity, a journalist, that what my problem in Saudi Arabia was I was objecting to visas that were being issued to terrorists, essentially the Mujahideen being recruited for the war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. Now, that said, Diana Castillo, who very kindly invited me down here, wanted me to talk a little bit about the 28 pages. It's a good segue into my book because I have a website, www.michaelspringmann.com. And on that website are three marvelous write-ups of my book by three extremely good investigative journalists. Andrew Craig, who had written the book Presidential Puppetry, which I used in writing this book, Visas for Al-Qaeda. Barry Zwicker, the Canadian journalist, he did an excellent write-up of the book for me. And Wayne Madsen, who did another good job. And in Wayne's writing about the book, he says briefly, Springmann's book serves as a unique preface and epilogue to the Senate report on the missing 28 pages from the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on 9/11 intelligence failures. Wayne says that I had provided visas to Saudi and other Wahhabist radicals, and this provides for the reader what is, according to intelligence insiders, what has been identified as a key finding in the missing 28 pages. Now, these 28 pages, granted that you've got 800 some pages that are not classified, but in the 28 pages, they deal with foreign support for the alleged hijackers, 15 of whom were Saudis, and 11 of whom got their visas at the CIA's Jeddah consulate. Now, there have been some congressmen who have tried to pry the lid off this secrecy. Representatives Walter Jones and Stephen Lynch, who I think both were Democrats, and Bob Graham, a Democrat from Florida, who's the former Intelligence Committee chairman in the Senate. He says that these missing pages implicate senior members of the Saudi government, including Prince Bandar, who'd been a Saudi ambassador to the United States for years and years, along with Turki Al-Faisal, who had also been an ambassador, and both Bandar and Faisal were head of the Saudi Intelligence Directorate at various times. This is confirmed in a new book put out by Roger Stone, a longtime Republican operative. He devotes page 324 in his book Jeb and the Bush Crime Syndicate, or the Bush Crime Syndicate, to this matter. Rand Paul, the Republican from Kentucky, said pretty much the same thing. Now, they seem to think that Saudi pressure to keep this stuff secret, and Israeli pressure as well, because apparently in some of the footnotes in these missing 28 pages, it ties the Israelis to various things, most likely to their company ICTS, which managed security at the Boston Logan Airport and the Newark Airport. And in Wayne Madsen, on his website, Wayne Madsen Report, he has one article that lists Saudi companies and banks and other companies and banks that have been protected in this 28-page secrecy business. So, let me get back to my book, and let me quote a German purchaser of my book. He said that this explains the background to what is happening in Europe with the weapons of mass migration, with people being driven out of the Middle East and South Asia and North Africa into Europe, creating hatred between the locals living in Germany and France and Belgium and other countries, and the Arabs and Muslims who are being driven into Europe from the Middle East and elsewhere. In large part due to American bombing, and I think in large part due to the American intelligence services, along with other intelligence services, getting these people to go. I mean, these traffickers that get $1,000 or $5,000 a head, are they all freelancers, or they have some ties to the Central Intelligence Agency? And as the German journalist Manuel Achterreiter noted, you can't talk about the Brussels terror attacks unless you start talking about the efforts to destabilize other countries, to stop supporting terrorists operating in foreign countries, to stop the open borders policy of Angela Merkel, and to stop calling the Syrian government, the legal Syrian government, a dictatorship. So I think we need to kind of look at the big picture here. Now, what's in my book, all 421 footnotes scattered through 250-some pages, and that's excluding the introduction and the index and the bibliography. You're not going to get it from other places. You're not going to get it from Amy Goodman. I sent her a copy of my book. I followed it up with a letter, an email, and telephone calls. Dead silence. But years ago, she had me and Greg Palast on her show talking about the CIA visa bill that was essentially recruiting terrorists. Now, you're not going to hear it from 60 Minutes. I sent them a copy of the book. I sent them a letter and a follow-up telephone call and emails, and dead silence. Same thing for Frontline. So, there are progressives and there are progressives. But essentially, what fascinates a lot of people about my book is the unholy connection between the State Department and the Central Intelligence Agency. Depending on who you talk to, the number of spooks at the State Department range from anywhere from 30% to 2/3 or more. I was told by a former CIA station chief, as well as a real Foreign Service officer, Jay Hawley, that roughly 1/3 of the people who claim to be State Department officers aren't. They work for the CIA or the NSA or some other alphabet soup organization around the American intelligence services. And the State Department doesn't hire the best and the brightest either. For example, when I was in India, in New Delhi, I was commercial attaché reporting to the commercial counselor, Edward W.M. Bryant. Well, Ted Bryant, he was believed to be taking money from Indian businessmen to have them recommended to American businessmen who come into the consular or commercial section, and say, well, who's a good contact here? I want to sell my products, I want to invest in India, I want Indians to invest in the United States. What can I do? Well, Brian would take money from corrupt businessmen and pass their names on to American companies. One of these guys, Don Kemka, K-H-E-M-K-A, he was a known Russian agent and a conduit for Soviet black money in India. Ted Bryant's wife, Bilha, she was Israeli, and Carter Talk said that she still worked for the Israeli intelligence services, reporting to them on things of interest happening in the American embassy. When I was in Stuttgart, you had Jane Whitley. She was the chief of the consular section, and she would steal things. She took her employees' silver spoons when people collected them and they disappeared from the desk drawer. She took things from the consulate, like pictures off the walls, and she went off to Perth, Australia as Consul General. And she took $40,000 of the taxpayers' money and used it to decorate her official residence and her office without approval of Washington, D.C. And when the State Department called her, they said, either retire with a full pension, or we'll try and get the money back. So they let her keep the money that she'd wasted, plus retire on that government pension, which roughly averages probably $5,000 a month. So, these are the kind of people that the State Department hires and promotes. Now, when I gave my kickoff lecture on my book at the National Press Club a little bit more than a year ago, I told the people there at the table, well, I kind of follow the directions in Alice in Wonderland. You begin at the beginning and go straight on through to the end. But I think in my situation, and from what I mentioned a little bit earlier today, we could probably start at the end and go back to the beginning. And as I mentioned, the Americans are using their intelligence services, other people's intelligence services, and American taxpayers' money, and other people's taxpayers' money to recruit and train terrorists from all over the world, and the only stipulation being that they be wild and crazy and fanatical as possible. And it started out with Jimmy Carter when the Soviets moved into Afghanistan. The American government was very worried because the Shah had just been overthrown, and they were losing all their national security agencies' signals intelligence operations in Iraq. And he said, well, let's shift to Afghanistan. That's nearby and close to the Soviet Union. Except that the Soviets had moved their army into the country. So, it was a good idea. Let's get rid of Afghanistan. Let's change the government. Let's change the Soviets. Let's chase them out. And they recruited these people in Saudi Arabia and from all over the Middle East. Jeddah was the 5th largest visa issuing post at the time. And I was there in the late 1980s. And I was sent these people that didn't speak any known language, had no ties to their own country or to Saudi Arabia, but somebody just had to go to the United States. I never got an explanation why. And essentially the Immigration and Nationality Act and the State Department's own regulations say you do not issue a visa to anybody unless and until he can prove he's going to the United States for a particular reason and for a particular purpose, and you are assured that he will come back if he has enough ties to his own country or the place of visa application that will force him to do so. He's going to school, he's got a university degree, he's almost finished. He has a job, he owns property, most of his family is here. You name it. I mean, it's pretty much, the circumstances change depending on who you're talking to. But I would get people that wanted to visit their money in New York City, or a guy who's going to visit a trade show in the United States but couldn't tell me the name of the trade show or the city where it was located. And I would say no. And in one instance, the case of the guys from the trade show, a CIA case officer, Paul Harvin Tveit, he demanded within an hour that I issue the visa. And I said, no, the guy doesn't know where he's going and can't tell me why he's going there. And the law says, and the regulations say, if I have any doubts, he doesn't get the visa. The burden of proof is on him, not on me. So I said no. And then he went to the chief of the consular section, Justice Gideon Stevens, and got these visas issued. And this went on for the 18 months or so that I was in Jeddah. And it wasn't until I was out of the State Department and talking to Joe Trenton, the journalist, by chance, that I learned that these were terrorists, that they were recruiting for the Mujahideen. They were going to the United States for training and debriefings and whatever. And I was never told, except once. The station, I'm sorry, the base chief, a CIA base is a CIA office in a consulate, and a station is a CIA office that controls all of the clandestine activities in the country, and it's attached to the embassy. In Saudi Arabia, I don't remember now whether it was 1 floor or 2 floors that the CIA was running out of Jeddah. But Eric Qualkenbush came to me and said, look, I've got this Iranian guy. He's one of our agents. We want him in Washington for consultations. He's been to the States before. His family has a rug shop in Jeddah. Make it look good. Wink, wink. Geez, what is this? So the guy shows up. He's got a letter from his company. He produces identification of his passport that says who he is. He answers my questions as to why he's going. He's very relaxed, very calm. He gives me a good story. I had no reason to disbelieve it. He has previous visas issued to him in his passport from other consular officers in the past. And I said, why do we need to put the fix in? This guy is a good contact. He's coming back to Jeddah. He has a job. He has a business. He has reasons to go to the United States. And when he's done in the United States, he's coming back home. And to this day, I wonder, why didn't Qualkenbush tell me all these other people? Like the guy, for example, he was a Sudanese. He was in Jeddah. And he was a refugee from Sudan. He was unemployed in Saudi Arabia, but he just had to go to the United States. And I said no, no, and no. And Karen Sasahara, who was a political officer in Jeddah, successor to Henry Ensher, and I don't think she works for the Department of State, never worked for the Department of State, the same thing for Henry Ensher. Karen is now deputy chief of mission in Sana'a in Yemen, and I assume her job was to coordinate between the American government and the Saudi government in trying to destroy Yemen. But Karen demanded a visa for this guy. I kept refusing, and Justice Stevens again issued a visa. And I asked him afterwards, Justice, I saw him in the hallway, why did you issue a visa to this guy? There's no reason for him to go to the United States. There's nothing to pull him back to Saudi Arabia or the Sudan. Well, I issued it for national security reasons. And as far as I know, there is no legal definition of national security in the United States Code or the federal Constitution. But, this went on in Jeddah, and it was absolutely amazing. And I was out of the State Department. Nobody could tell me why. When I was in Stuttgart, prior to being tossed out of the State Department, they had two successive consuls general, D.A. Mount, and Doug Jones. These were people who spent most of their career in Washington, had a couple of excursion tours abroad, and nobody knew who they were or where they came from. And when I raised the issue by talking to the State Department one day, the article I was writing, I was told by the legal advisor's office that you can't connect Mount and Jones to the Central Intelligence Agency because that's against the law. Well, the thing is that you really wonder about these people because the left hand and the right hand don't seem to know what they're doing, and even the fingers on each hand don't seem to know what they're doing. But, you get some publicity. For example, RT has interviewed me a couple of times, both in the Urban Service, and I've been called downtown to talk to their Moscow office about various aspects of the book and various aspects of international affairs. Press TV has been kind enough to call me from time to time, generally what's going on in Saudi Arabia. But you won't hear from the Washington Post. You won't hear from NBC News. It's a good way to keep the lid on, I think, because there's only 5 companies, I think, in the United States that control most of the news media. I think I mentioned that before. Now, the thing is that I had thought that by yelling and screaming and filing freedom of information lawsuits had maybe done something to stop the American government and its activities abroad with some less than safe inheritance. But as time went by and I started looking at the paper and watching television news, I really began to wonder. So after the State Department quashed my last Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, but I gave them a real reason why, I decided I would write a book. I'd start off with my own experiences with state, and I would go on to what I could see in my research about this situation. And I was kind of surprised as I went on. I did research and writing for about 2 years before I published the book in February of 2015. And I was astonished. Even in the Washington Post, if you read it carefully, you could pick things out about the Americans were sending people into the Balkans. These people in the Balkans, working with the Kosovo Liberation Army, working with the Central Intelligence Agency, working with NATO, they were out to knock over the country and make it into little pieces, non-functioning statements. I read a few books. Maximilian Fort wrote a thing called Explosion Towards Certain, where he talked about all the stories the American government told about what was really going on in places like North Africa, for example. This was basically lies. There weren't Gaddafi mass rapists running around. Gaddafi's government, which was one of whose people had the most standard, who had given their people the most liberal standards of living in all of Africa, he wasn't importing murderers from sub-Saharan Africa to kill people. I read, actually a right-wing fellow, John Schindler, who used to teach the National War College. He wrote a book called Unholy Terror, where he talked about all the help NATO in the United States and Bill Clinton gave to these terrorists that they were recruiting out of the Mujahideen, who were transformed and rebranded into Al-Qaeda. They were operating extensively in Yugoslavia. The German External Intelligence Service, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, they worked with them and sent munitions into Yugoslavia to be given to the terrorists, concealed in cases of food. I just marveled at this. And I looked at Amy Craig's book, for example, Presidential Puppetry, which I can recommend you. He had articles about John Brennan, the CIA chief, who had been Barack Obama's counterterrorism chief in the White House. The man was a Saudi file and doing his best to support some radical and savory characters all the way around the world. I pretty much talk about a lot of things here. I talk about how I got into the State Department. I talk about what happened in Afghanistan, how it got started. I talked about the Balkans, what happened to Yugoslavia. I talked about Iraq. Who's the terrorist now? I mean, there is President Gharib, who is a noted expert on Al-Qaeda and Lebanon, the Middle East, and the Kurds. He said there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq until the Americans invaded in 2003. I talked about Libya. I talked about how the British intelligence services had been Libya trying to assassinate Muammar Gaddafi. How they worked with the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which was an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. What used to be the American Spingmann before they rebranded them as ISIL. The book talks about Syria. It talks about the Henry Entry, whom I mentioned, who had been in Jeddah, doing mysterious things with visas. So he always recommended these particular characters to me to get a visa. He went to Iraq. He was the deputy to Robert Ford, who was counsel for political affairs in Baghdad. And they both worked to recruit terrorists in Iraq. Ford went to Syria, where his job was to recruit more terrorists to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. Bashar might not be a philosopher king, but the multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious situation in Syria was a lot better before the Americans tried to overthrow him. Additionally, I covered the Turks. Turkey used to be a holiday dish. Now it's a terrorist state. They worked with the Americans to unleash this migration of peoples into Europe to help destabilize Europe and help destabilize the Middle East. And I ended the book by talking about the cost of this. I mean, the nice gentleman who introduced me earlier talked about, people died because of American policy around the world. Well, a lot of Americans don't really care. Iraqis, Yemenis, Libyans, who are they? What's the difference between Monaco and Morocco? They don't know. I mean, you've got Americans, for example, as Susie Jacoby said in her book about the United States, she talked about half the adults in this country have not read a book in the last year. 25% of the American people think that the sun revolves around the earth. And another 25% of high school biology teachers think that the dinosaurs and cavemen existed. Now, there are other costs, real costs. I mean, besides the 500,000 children who died because of American sanctions on Iraq, which Madeleine Albright, the Democratic Secretary of State, thought was a good exchange. I don't accept that. I'm horrified by it. But there's other things here. I mean, look at the United States. You read in the paper, you watch TV, you have a woman driving under an overpass on the beltway and a chunk of concrete, half the size of her body, lands on her windshield. They didn't do any maintenance on the beltway. You read about water main breaks in D.C. and all over the country. You read about sewage treatment that doesn't handle the sewage. You read about the costs. I mean, billions of dollars to do something about traffic. You go through DC traffic, one of the suburbs here, and you think, does anybody work? Why is the traffic backed up at midday in the middle of the week? Well, nobody has any money for lights to time the traffic lights, no computerized system to make sure that you can get priority for the buses to bring people through. The subway needs a fortune for repairs and maintenance and expansion, and the money's not there. So you've got some real costs. And you've got political costs. People don't like the United States, as I mentioned earlier. One of the gentleman from Hispanic TV. Well, it really takes money to repair things. You have the United States putting all its money into its war machine. If you count all of the budgets for military expenditures in the entire world, the United States, Russia, China, Japan, South Africa, you name it, all the countries combined together, the United States spends 40% of the total on its war machine. And who are we going to fight? Afghanistan, with a gross national product per capita of something like $350 a year. There might have been 25 million people in Syria before the war started. We've got $300 million people in the United States fighting them. You've got an imbalance of power. And it's easy to fight Libya. There are 50,000 soldiers in the regular army to cover a country about the size of Alaska. So what do? These are tall guys, they're strong men. To keep the war machine going, to keep the fear alive. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. There's no evil empire that speaks Russian. So you've got to give jobs for the boys. You've got to make sure that there's money for the bullets, money for the bombs. But that's good business. And they keep companies going, they give jobs to people. But what happens is that all the way around the world, people don't like the United States. In Lebanon, in Syria, in Libya maybe, you've got 14 to 50% of the population who has a positive view of the United States. You talk about Lebanon, for example, I think something like 60% of the people who don't like America. Some of the Yemenis don't like the United States. We're helping the Saudis bomb the hell out of the country. You've got Pakistan. They're being bombed with drones. They don't have a real good opinion of the United States. So, this is going to continue. At the end of the book, I say, well, where are we going? And I talk about Tunisia. That's a good place to knock over. It's not terribly strong. Some of the terrorist attacks in Tunisia. And I think ultimately, the ultimate goal is to get rid of Iran. The evil enemy